Welcome to Created Healthy. I'm Dawn Combs. It's a common idea that God gave us everything we need in nature, but do we believe it enough to walk that out in truth? Often the very same people who say this go looking for answers on how to use food and medicine from man-made sources. Everything man creates comes with a user's manual. Why would God be any different? I challenge you to join me in seeking revelation about our body, mind, soul, and spirit health by digging into His written word and in practicing pure science in the visible world of His creation. As believers, what is our responsibility to our neighbor, to those that are around us? I am in Deuteronomy 22 through 25 today, and I am reminded of a tactic that was used in the most recent pandemic, a twist, a lie about Christian dogma that was used to push people to go against what they knew God to be telling us not to do, not to go along with fear and propaganda, but to stand with His truth. And instead, there was the attempt to manipulate with a misunderstanding. And this is why it's so important for us to really dig deep and understand what God truly is telling us in His word and His creation before we buy lies from the world, especially when they're being sold back to us as Christian belief. So in this, in Deuteronomy 22, Moses is going over, actually throughout these chapters, he's going over the laws that govern kind of the minutia of day-to-day life. You see things like don't sow your vineyard with two kinds of seeds, and I am still digging into this and thinking through this. I almost talked today about that aspect, but he talked about don't plow with an ox and a donkey together, and don't mix wool and linen. Another health aspect that the resonance and energetics of the clothes that we put on and the deadness of plastic clothes that people are wearing is really important for our health. But this goes through claiming that a wife is not what she said she was, not a virgin upon marriage, and what happens when that claim is made and the proof that needs to be there. Small things about who can stand in assembly and what you need to do to go to battle, divorce, and also how many times you can beat your slave. Little things like this, talking about our just weights and measures. And there are so many things here that have been discussed here, there, and everywhere through different sermons that I've heard over the years. But the thing that stood out to me was at the very beginning of Deuteronomy 22, where there are these ideas of what we owe our neighbor. And the first off is that if their livestock runs away, it's our responsibility, very simply, to catch their livestock and to keep them until they can come get them. And I think there's a lot of times that our neighbors have had to deal with our runaway livestock, and they never once just went ahead and ate them or sold them. Even though they didn't have livestock themselves, they let us know so that we could retrieve them. And that's a neighborly thing to do, not to take advantage. I think is probably an overarching thing, to look out for one another and not take advantage of a situation where an accident has happened. This next one that stood out is when you build a new house, God is suggesting to them that they must build a parapet because there was a lot of life lived on the flats of the Israelites' roofs. They went up there to dry their herbs. They went up to dry grain. They would sit up there in the cool of the evening. There was a lot of social time spent there, trying to get out of doors. It was oppressive in a small space with not a lot of airflow or maybe windows, and it was much more pleasant to sit up on the housetops. And so a parapet was part of a roof design, because if somebody fell asleep, sometimes they did sleep on the roof because it was cooler. There's also the Festival of Booths where people did camp out on their roofs. So building a parapet was looking ahead. It was thinking ahead to when somebody might have an accident, somebody might roll off in their sleep, somebody might misstep in the dark. And God is saying here that you should build this parapet so that you do not have to bear the pain and the misery of a blood guilt. Blood guilt of somebody who might fall accidentally. And of course you didn't push them and you didn't intend for them to die. But if you don't take precautions to protect somebody in a known dangerous situation, then there is a guilt there of you not looking out for the possibilities. And I think back to where there were the laws against if your bull gets loose and kills somebody, or maims somebody, it's not your fault. Nobody's holding you accountable because we can't actually control natural happenings like that. We can't control nature, even though we like to think so. But if your bull has injured somebody before and you've corralled him carelessly so as to not prevent it when you know it's a possibility, then you can carry blood guilt. And so there's an idea that if we're knowingly harming somebody, then we are guilty. Not that we have murdered them, but we are going to carry the weight of guilt, and we are going to carry a responsibility for that along with that person who just had an accident. When we went through the most recent pandemic, there was the idea that you needed to sacrifice your own health. You needed to risk your own health with experimental options. And it was worth it because even if you had to do it for community health, you might save a life. You might protect transmission of a disease that might not be good for that person. And it's a really dangerous slope to be on where we make ourselves responsible for other people's health. There is a statement here, it is biblical for us to watch out and be caring and considerate. So, unfortunately, in these days, you can't stay home when you're sick because you don't have enough time and you won't get paid, and there's no allowance for you to spend time away from the office and do the work where you are not sharing what's going on. So knowingly passing something on, sadly, in a strange way, we don't have control over, but we should. When my kids did go to school, if they were sick, I kept them home. Not just because I didn't want to share with other kids, but also because it was the best thing for their health. Community health is a very tangly thought to kind of tear through, and we have become very confused with believing that our bodies are constantly a danger to ourselves and a danger to others, and so we must inject and prevent because we might something might jump off of us and attack somebody else, and that's just not the design of nature, and that's perhaps a discussion for another day. Everybody's responsibility here, and this is biblical, definitely being supported as we read. Everybody has their own responsibility for their own body. Everybody has their own responsibility for their relationship with their God, their own personal spiritual health, their own mental health. But we do have the responsibility that once we have cared for ourselves and really become solid, that we turn and we love our neighbor as ourself. We care for others as ourself. So building a parapet isn't some sort of a pre-indictment or pre-punishment from being possibly guilty of murdering somebody because you didn't prevent them from having any kind of accident. It just isn't our responsibility. Building a parapet is the same as taking care of your personal health. It is seeing out far enough that if you look ahead, if you care for the possibility of harming somebody else, you take those precautions beforehand, long beforehand. You may build a parapet on the top of your roof 30 years before somebody accidentally rolls and is caught and preserved from falling. It's the same with your health. You start out when you're young, you build and you build and you build so that when there is something that goes through the population, you are strong and you withstand and you're resilient, and the disease doesn't have a chance to mutate and take hold and harm somebody else in the same way that it might have. So personal responsibility, it's a deep subject, and it's definitely there's a very thin line between taking on more than you are required to do and making it become a distraction from your purpose, from what God is actually asking you to do. There's a line between that, and there's a line between looking ahead and trying to do what you can to keep other people safe. I pray that God is blessing you with the insight to see the difference in that line and showing you where you can strengthen yourself and protect others. And I pray that He brings you back to study with me again on another day. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with a friend. And I'm always interested in hearing what God is laying on your heart. So drop me a rating or review, or join the conversation on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube at Don Combs Really.